voices blending, melodies ascending, harmony in the air. Our songs are never ending. In the barbershop we create magic. Brad and John show, yeah, it's pure classic. No instruments needed, just our vocal range. Notes flying high, it's our musical exchange. Tracy's station may try, but they can't compete. Our barbershop style, it can't be beat. Oh, the harmony of voices, so sweet. In the barbershop of life, our tunes will repeat. No need for instruments, no need for a band. Just the Brad and John show, the finest in the land.
John, you know what the Barbershop Quartet means, don't you?
What does it mean? Is it four guys in striped shirts and wacky hats singing an ode to the Brad and John show and their listeners?
But why do we do that? What's the special occasion that we play that?
Oh, because it is Monday, right? Every Monday. Or as Brad would say on an iChart thumbnail that he has mercifully fixed, TGIM Monday, which is redundant. Thank God it's Monday. It's Monday, right, Brad?
No, it's Friday. It's Friday. And what we do, also, what do we do special on Friday? Come on.
Oh, you're asking me? Yes. Usually I can't hear the Polka Boys, but do we play the Polka Boys?
We do, and here they are.
Time for the John Combest Top 3.
That is right. On Friday, we have the special intro to the show and a special intro to John Combest's A Block, which consists of him giving us the 3 most important things from johncombest.com. Now, you may say, what is johncombest.com? It's this amazing website that our host, John Combest, puts together for, 23 plus years now? Is that, get it right, 23 plus years?
Yeah, it's something in that ballpark. Yeah, Brad.
Every single day, he puts together this list of all the important stuff you should know in the state of Missouri. Nothing fancy. The website is using web, what version again?
0.0.
And what he does is he puts links to all these important stories you should know about. You just click on the link, bang, you're there. Now, what we do is, on this special occasion, on Friday, we bring in this guy right here.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do you do, sir?
Now on with the countdown.
And what else do you do?
And here they are.
And what else do you do?
We're on our way to the number 1. Their stories coming up.
I got to hit all the buttons. I'm sorry, John. And then we start off with...
In third place...
Brad, on your way to the studio this morning, you may have noticed that it's a little bit chilly out there. Did you notice the chill in the air?
It's very nice. This is the way I wish spring would be all the time.
I know. We usually don't get blessed with this kind of weather. Here where I am, Brad, it's exactly 49 degrees. And that has a lot to do with story number 3 today. And in fact, the story that's been the biggest story in the St. Louis area for the last 7 days. And what I'm talking about is climate change. I know that you were sweltering this morning, Brad. You know the earth is getting so hot because of all this climate change. It's disgusting. It's terrible. We're all smoldering today. And the subject of climate change is in a Joe Holliman piece. You know, he's at the Post-Dispatch. He's one of the guys that holds elected officials' feet to the fire, so to speak. Here's his headline from the Post-Dispatch yesterday. Emergency staff was in, quote, collaboration, unquote, workshop as tornado neared St. Louis. Now, we've talked for the last few days, Brad, about the fact that the team that's tasked with keeping an eye on the tornado sirens, with keeping St. Louis city residents safe, was in a workshop the day that a giant tornado and at least giant storms were scheduled to hit St. Louis, right? So it turns out, I assumed, Brad, that they would be at some workshop that was learning how to do emergency response better. But that's not the case. The folks that are tasked with protecting St. Louisans from natural disasters were at a collaboration workshop where one of the subjects, according to the invitation to the workshop, was, quote, climate change will continue to create new uncertainties and pose disruptions. And at that workshop, participants would, quote, learn and develop skills to increase agility and collaboration in city functions. So, Brad, on a day where for the better part of last week, storms were anticipated to hit St. Louis City, the folks tasked with protecting St. Louisans were at a workshop 7 blocks away from the tornado siren button, and they were learning how to be agile. Do you see any irony in that, Brad?
It's dripping with irony, John. What are you talking about?
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
And we had some very severe local climate change where the skies got black, and then they got green, and the winds picked up, and the rain hit, and the hail hit, and then these winds spun around. Talking about climate change, right, John?
Yeah, I think so. And you know, Joe Holloman points out in the piece, and Joe does a little bit of, he kind of mixes straight reporting with some of the stuff that previous columnists at the Post-Dispatch had done. Older folks like me, Brad, would remember a guy named Jerry Berger, who did a little bit of gossip writing, a woman named Deb Peterson, who did a little bit of news and a little bit of gossip. Joe does mostly news, but he adds a little bit of opinion in there, a little bit of flavor, so to speak. And he asks, isn't it important to think, he said, isn't it fair to ask that if at some point on Friday, considering the early and serious warnings of severe storms, someone in emergency management should have considered canceling the workshop? And it should be pointed out that the institute that put this together was a nonprofit, Brad. You know, your favorite groups are nonprofits. This one is called the AIR Collaborative, and its mission is to provide programming that inspires new connections and ignites the creative economy. And it's run by a woman named Beth Flowers. She has long-standing ties to the St. Louis area. In fact, she worked for one of St. Louis's most storied mayors, Freeman Bosley Jr. She worked for his campaign back in 1997. He lost to Clarence Thomas that year. But anyway, Beth Flowers runs this collaborative, and they teach people how to be more agile, Brad, how to do their jobs better.
You know, there's more irony to this whole goofy story, and but let me go. What was the name of that TV show? Was it a TV show or a movie? And the premise of it was there's one guy when they do like the State of the Union address where all the important people, the president, the vice president, all the reps and senators and everybody's in the Capitol building, and there's one guy who stays away. What is he? Was it Designated Survivor? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, I think that might be the title. I'm not familiar with the movie or the show, but yeah, if it's not called Designated Survivor, that's the concept at least.
Right. The idea being there's somebody that if as Shelley would say, the defecation hits the rotary oscillator, that there's somebody who is in charge who's not there. Wouldn't you think that they would have left one member of the staff behind and able to push the button? Don't you think that?
Yeah, I would think so. Or you would think, other people have said, why isn't the system automated?
Well,
why don't we have something from the feds that comes in that just overrides human error? And, like I've mentioned in a few other cases before, Brad, when you build a process, I would always look at it and say, what can we do to idiot-proof this? Well, if somebody has a bad night or fat thumbs or whatever it is, how do you idiot-proof a process to take human error out of the equation?
As a broadcaster, we've had this system for years now, where it's a totally automated EAS system. And the interesting part of it is the way it works, John, is, as a matter of fact, it's sort of funny because of the fact that they were talking about this on 97.1 because, Annie Frey was on the air that day, and the tornado came within like a half mile of their studios. They could have looked out the window and seen the tornado. But what happens is the system automatically takes over the radio station. You, as if it went off right now, I have control of no control of the radio station. It automatically goes to the EAS system. And if I'm on the air in mid-sentence, bang, the EAS kicks in and takes over the radio station, gives the alerts. I mean, those boxes are they're right now. I can give you a link to a company where they could buy one right now for $3,000. $3,000 probably costs another $1,500 to install. Totally automated. It's done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. But then, Brad, who would get the city paycheck and be in charge of pressing the button?
I have no idea.
Do you really want to eliminate city jobs, Brad? What are you running, a city doge over there?
Oh, John, are you saying this is a union job? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it might be. Now, climate change, it's easy to beat up on climate change. And I know somebody that did that, and they're in story number 2.
And we move along right here, right now.
Up a notch to number 2.
Yesterday morning, the Mark Cox Morning Show. You can listen to him right now. Let's face it, you're listening to this on YouTube. You're not listening to this live over the air. So you could go, if you were listening live, though, you could go to 97.1, listen to the Mark Cox Morning Show. He had Josh Hawley on to talk about, yes, of course, the storms, but also Trump's one big, beautiful budget, which we know, Brad, today, on Friday, we now know that it passed the House in an all-night, razor-thin session. But Mark Cox asked Josh Hawley about at least the Senate version of it yesterday, and Josh Hawley, ever the populist, says, we will not touch Medicaid benefits. He says, quote, I think that's absolutely vital. We're a working-class party now. Now, back to climate change, Brad. Here's what Hawley says we should cut. He says we need to roll back all of the unbelievable Green New Deal, climate change, garbage spending, trillions of it that Joe Biden did. And there's probably even more of that could be cut out. It's so disastrous, terrible for our economy, terrible for our standing as a country. So there's plenty of work there to do. So Hawley says, hey, hands off old people's Medicare, hands off Medicaid, go after that new Green Deal boondoggle. There's a lot of fat to trim there.
Do you agree with what he's saying?
I think that there's no feasible way to stop runaway government spending without cutting entitlements. And I think we should be cutting Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, you name it. I think we should slash it. And, my opinion has not changed as I've gotten older. I'm not any more likely to say, well, I paid into the Social Security and it's a contract. I don't see how the math, as Gen Alpha would say, the math isn't mathing. There's not enough waste, fraud, and abuse in government to cut it out. You got to start cutting some of these entitlements, Brad. And I know that it makes people mad. And what about my Medicaid and all this other stuff? But you got to cut spending somewhere. And you should start trimming Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, everything.
Well, John, the problem I have with the whole Social Security thing is that and you know this from working for a big corporation. Okay, if you have a pension plan, and this has gotten to be sort of far and few between. Most of the companies don't have this anymore. But back in the day, there were pension plans, and the money was supposedly segregated into separate accounts. In other words, people are paying to their pension plans, and that's like hands-off money. Matter of fact, for a while, the government term was, they were talking about a lockbox. The money was in, remember
you put it in a lockbox.
In a lockbox, okay. And if you, as a company executive, put your little grubby fingers into that pension fund and took some of that money out of that pension fund and use it to maybe buy a new machine for the plant, or maybe, expand a couple locations if you're in retail, oh my God, you could end up in jail. Right, John?
Yeah, you would be wearing an orange jumpsuit.
Right. Okay. But the federal government has this thing called Social Security, where the money essentially sits there in general fund. There's no specific account for Social Security. It's just money that goes into. I do have a complaint in that respect, because of the fact that I think that the whole Social Security thing should be that if you work for 30 years and every year you put in $10,000 in Social Security, at the end of the year you have what, $3 million? Wouldn't that, or was it $300,000?
Yeah, a whole lot of money.
$300,000. Okay, you have an account for $300,000. Okay, but the problem with it is there's lots of people who draw money out of these funds that never put any money into it. And for example, we've got all sorts of things. There's more stuff that comes out all the time about the illegal aliens who are coming in into the entire country and getting all these benefits, and they put zero into any fund because they've never paid any Social Security taxes. They've never paid any taxes because they came across the border, and the only thing they've done is take money from the government. I see. Now, that's a problem I have. The Medicaid thing gets complicated because you know this with the state of Missouri. This goes back to what, 2021 or something like that, when they had the constitutional amendment in the state of Missouri. Wasn't that the year? Do you know?
2020 maybe. It might have been 2020.
And do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, we challenged it, and we, being Josh Hawley at the time, who was Attorney General, pushed back against Obamacare, and then the vote for Medicaid.
Right. And essentially the money that the state doles out under Medicaid is, I'm pretty sure, if not totally, for a good portion of it, funded by the federal government. Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So the state really has no problem with, hey, you want to make Medicaid? Yeah, we'll give you that Medicaid money because they don't care. It's not their money. It's the Fed money.
And philosophically, I think that it's fair to say that there were a number of Republicans who stood up who don't like the idea of the federal government mandating that we have this program, but that Republicans lost that battle.
Right.
We lost the Obamacare battle.
Right. And that's essentially the same problem where people are getting money and here comes along Trump and essentially saying, well, you have to have work provisions to get some of these benefits like Medicaid. And people go, oh, my God, he's going to make us go back to work so we can get federal money? Think what's wrong with that sentence, right?
I know, Brad. You know, the phrase that I learned yesterday that apparently has been around in corporate America for a while now is RTO, return to office. You know who returned to the office after the storms? The subject of story number one.
The number one.
Senator Eric Schmitt, when not checking up on storm victims here in St. Louis, was in D.C. and did an interview with Fox News. He was asked specifically about what happened to the Israeli embassy staffers. And I shouldn't so much say what happened to them, but what could happen. You know, Eric Schmitt is the former chief attorney here in the state of Missouri, Missouri's attorney general. He ran what the AGs call Missouri's largest law firm, the Attorney General's office. And according to Eric Schmitt, for the man who killed these young Israeli embassy staffers, the death penalty is in play. The death penalty is not out of the question. Perhaps more importantly, Schmitt says that this incident shows that this dangerous stuff is what he called it. He reminded us that this shows that Hamas is here on American soil. Brad, Hamas is not just something we see in faraway news clips when we see battles going on in the Middle East. Hamas is here on American soil, and we saw what happened with the senseless death of those two Israeli embassy staffers.
You know, John, I've talked about this. You and I, you've got your records of all the time we talk about this. I will never understand. If my father was still alive, my father would be shocked by what's going on right now. My father was a World War II vet. He fought Nazis. He fought the Hitlers, these horrible people that rounded up the Jews and put them to horrible deaths. My father fought that. And can you imagine a lot of these World War II vets, if they were still around, thinking, okay, what the hell's going on? We thought we stomped this out with Hitler. You know, we thought we got rid of Nazis. We got rid of this incredible prejudice against Jewish people. What happened, John? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, just very bluntly in American politics, you have a very pro-Palestine wing that has, because they're activists and because they're pretty loud and effective, they have a stronghold in the current Democratic Party nationwide. And I think that you would once you have a toehold in a major American political party, that keeps a lot of people in that party from speaking out against the more radical elements.
And not to say things that aren't necessarily true, I'm going to say something and you can agree or disagree with it, but I'm pretty accurate. Most of the American Jews are Democrats. Isn't that pretty much the way it works?
I think historically most American Jews have voted Democrat for decades. Yeah, I think during the Reagan era, it kind of came back to Reagan because he was seen as being a friend of Israel.
Right.
But Trump has certainly helped that cause as well, Brad.
Right. And a lot of Jews have got across the line and voted for a Republican in Trump because has been in the first term and so far in the second term very, very, very pro-Israel. But for the most part, the Jews lead democratically, which I don't understand. I mean, how in the world could any Jewish American right now say, I'm a proud member of the Democratic Party, when the Democratic Party is essentially protecting these crazy nut Palestinian Hamas protesters? I don't get it.
It would seem that they're not too eager to criticize them,
I
are they,
don't
Brad?
understand.
Hey, before we forget, and I know we only have a minute left in A block, but shout out to Annie Frey. She corrected something from our show yesterday in A block at the 158 mark.
Let's talk about that in B block, okay? Because I don't want to rush into that because that's sort of interesting because
that's it. Yeah, and it's important. Thank you, Brad.
Well, and not only that, John, I think it's interesting that we've gotten somebody. See, let me put it this way. I talk about other radio shows all the time. You and I do this all the time. And no other radio station will talk about us. I get it. I understand. And I think it's interesting because we talked about her and she listened to the show and she made
did she hear about our show, Brad?
I don't know. Was it you?
Okay, well, Brad, I included her on a tweet. How does anybody hear about our show?
John,
let's talk about it in B block.
I'm just going to turn the transmitter off and turn the license back in because according to you, nobody listens. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Okay.